Hutner, and we're back on Coffee with H2 with our fantastic guest photographer, Lucas Foglia. And we're talking with my class now. This is my Utopia and Dystopia class. We've been reading literature, and they're also looking at real life off-the-grid communities of all kinds of communes and various things, and studying a little bit about the history of communes in the US. So we're going to continue, and Lucas is going to tell us stories, and students will ask questions. So.
All right, so let's just go back to one thing. How many people in the audience think of themselves as activists? How many of you do? It's a good portion. All right, few topics, just for the record here. What are you activisting about? Racial equality?
Organic food.
All right.
Psychological well-being.
Right.
Women's rights.
Women's rights. Okay, so we're crossing a wide range. I think in this moment in history, it's always important, but it's especially important now to stand up for what you care about. If you post on Facebook, if you post on Twitter, if you're active on Instagram, if you're talking to friends, finding a way to communicate what you care about is important. Right? I was talking with my parents this morning about what anyone can do. All right, and we came up with these three things. All right, we can each give one of three things or more than one of three things. One, you can give your name to something. If you vote, you're giving your name to something. If you sign a petition, you're giving your name to something. Two, you can give your time to something. Time is activism. If you volunteer for an organization, if you work in a local community garden or a farm, if you go to a rally, that's giving yourself your time. If you are occupying, if you are calling, if you are doing anything to promote something that you care about, to try to keep something you care about to stay the way it is, or to try to change something that you think is important in the world, that's time. Third thing is money. And if you have extra that you don't need to live, any amount that you can give to something you believe in so other people can give their time, great. All right, so first thing, name. Second thing, time. Third thing, money. Three ways for activism. And I think it's important in this moment that we each choose at least one thing that we care about. I was deeply moved last June when I flew to the big island of Hawaii and stayed in one of the two beds at the Mauna Loa Observatory, which is a small weather observatory 11,000 feet up the side of a volcano, the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii. The air was thin, the landscape was black lava, and I visited with and photographed the scientists who are making the baseline record for climate change. Right? And I imagined that the actual science behind climate change was super advanced, and it is, but they're taking the same samples they've taken since the 1950s. And one of those samples involves unsealing a jug of air, or a jug without air, and filling it with air, and closing the jug, and then measuring the air. And amidst all this national and international debate on climate change being a theory or a fact, I looked at the science, and it was so relatively clear. And it was a jug of air that's measuring an effect that's changing over time. And then I took breaks from being on top of the mountain or the volcano and went and photographed on the southern coastline, which hypothetically has the cleanest air on Earth, and met some eco-villages and eco-communities there. And the contrast of that week and a half of being there, of driving between what felt like a paradise and what looked like a post-apocalyptic landscape, was pretty unforgettable. Yeah.
I have two questions. Well, you kind of answered the first one. I wanted to know, do you find yourself living amongst the people you photograph? And also, how has meeting all these different people shaped your life personally, or how you feel, or how you view the world also?
So I don't pretend to be inherently a part of the communities I'm going to visit. Usually I'm introduced to them by friends, and I have a reason to be there, which is to photograph, and I'm helping out. And so if someone's working on a farm, I'm working with them, and I have my camera there too. But I'm not living on that farm. I'm going to visit to photograph. And I try to be clear about those two things. So I don't want to deceive a community by saying I'm from somewhere I'm not, or that I am someone I'm not. I once, in North Carolina, tried to talk in a North Carolinian accent, and 2 people asked if I was British. So, you know, I learned it's best to just show up as I am and say who I am and say why I'm there. The second part of your question, what was it? Tell me.
How is like meeting all these different communities and people have
Change
shaped
me?
how you feel?
Oh,
Yeah.
big ways.
Yeah.
Like, one, like the things I quote in my everyday life, the stories I tell, are this hodgepodge of things I've heard from other people, some of which I have no idea if it's true. And so I always try to say, well, I learned from Lowell in Tennessee that blank. Like if I say where it's from, then it's not necessarily fact-checked, but it's source specific. In terms of my lifestyle, I'm living close to friends where we cook and eat together and buy food from local farms. I barter for services, which I've learned from my parents and from various communities I've gone and photographed. I have a politic that's shaped by experiences around the world, mostly in rural communities, and also in cities where I'm talking to people in the art world. So I am my reaction to all these different experiences, just like we all are. Right? Like, you're not the product of Long Island. You're not the product of your parents. You're a reaction to it. You know, especially at this age that you're at, you're choosing who you want to be. You know, in response to all these places you've been and all these people you've met and the way you grew up.
So you live in community, don't you? You live in sort of like the communities that you visited.
Yeah, well, right now, in the past, so when I published my first book, I was living in a communal house with a garden in the backyard. And then my life has changed the past few years. I went from being fairly local to, I think last year I was in 15 countries. And the result of that is I still have a cooperative space with friends, where we have 2 apartments. I have 1 apartment, my best friend has the other. My best friend's apartment is a co-op where everyone lives together and eats together. I go over there a lot. I use my apartment as a free place to stay for anyone with a purpose or a cause. So if there's an activist or a research group or a science group in town and they need a free place to stay in San Francisco, there's a lockbox outside and they can just go and stay. And I have friends from around the world doing work I believe in, and they come and stay. So my friend Stephanie the other day said, Lucas, you kind of live alone, but you don't really live alone. Because she'd never been over my apartment alone. There's always people over there.
Interesting.
And I love the fact that I'm going to fly back home tomorrow and I don't actually know who will be there.
That's amazing. So what's in your house? I mean, do you have a lot of personal things around, or?
So I edit my projects by making small prints and putting them up one of the walls in my kitchen is metal. And so I have small prints on the wall, and I cook for friends, and friends are there, and they help me edit my projects. So my projects are the result of the opinion of my community and my own response to their opinions. So my kitchen wall is covered in photographs. There's a guest room that also has some storage for my photographic equipment, and a large bedroom with multiple beds. So I don't know. I got like 3 or 4 beds in that apartment. It's kind of commune-y. It's kind of also my apartment.
Fascinating.
And nearby is my friend's communal house where we all cook and eat together.
So you live in San Francisco, and,
Yeah.
and I'm on a.
Oh, I'm normal for San Francisco.
I know you are.
Minus the Google and even with
I've-
Google, it's not. Some of the friends in the co-op work for Google.
I found this amazing spot on Facebook, and I salivate over it. I imagine this is me going to do this, but there's a sort of a community board of these kinds of this kind of housing.
Yeah.
And when I first read it, it was sort of like this is a joke, because for Long Island, there would be no such board that I know of. Maybe there is one, you could tell me, Chad, but it's really, it's we're community. We're forming a community, and there's photographs, and this is what we are. We're vegan, or we're photographers, we're artists, and we want to live and, grow food together. And it just doesn't seem like it's as common in the East Coast. Why do you think that is, or at least in the Northeast?
So growing up here, most people I meet are living here because they grew up here or because of work. It's a job or it's heritage. When I moved to San Francisco and I say, why do you live here? Most people have moved from somewhere else and they have a reason for moving there. So one of the downsides of that community is we don't have as much history there. And there's transience. I have friends who have come and also moved away. But the upsides is that people have more of their idealism is more of an active part of their life there. But I don't think that's impossible for Long Island. I mean, my parents have a community of people, of friends, of colleagues who live alternative lifestyles on Long Island. If anything, it's more of an identity here. If you are a vegan or vegetarian activist in San Francisco, I'm sorry, but you're not that special. Right? Here it can be a point of identity.
True.
Right? So if you're interested in the cool factors, stay local. Right? I think it's important actually to stay local and do things here.
So you mentioned that there's a lot of people who moved to San Francisco. What's your reason for settling there?
I was photographing in Wyoming in 2010, just after New Year's. It was negative 10 degrees, and I lost feeling in my hands. And I went to my rental car and was defrosting my hands in the rental car. And my phone rang. I picked up, and it was my best friend with his fiance, and I said, "You want to move to San Francisco?" And it just seemed so warm that I said yes. And I moved there cold, or without knowing a community of people. But in the months before, I made a lot of phone calls and emails and invited a lot of people to Yale, where I was at school, to come and visit as visiting artists, and got to know the beginning of a community. And the thing I've learned in life is, like, wherever I go, if I have a project I care about, if it's a thing I want to change in the world or want to show the world, and I have a way of talking about that, other people can believe in me because of my project. Right? So it's the biggest tool I've ever had, is to have something I'm working on that I care about. So when I went into San Francisco, I had a project. And people said, "What are you up to?" And I said, "Well, I'm looking for work here and there, but I got this thing that I'm working on that I feel is really important to me." And that was a way of building community pretty quick. So. Yeah.
Have you ever been anywhere that frightened you?
Yeah, I was just telling you about that cloud in Alaska.
But anywhere else?
Well, tell us about the cloud in Alaska.
I can tell you other places too. All right, so two stories. So as I was picked up by a helicopter pilot from a research base on the Juneau ice field in Alaska. It was a sunny day after a storm had come through, when we were flying back in the helicopter to Juneau, where the airport was, and we were following a glacier and turned around a mountain and saw a wall of cloud in front of us with lightning snaking through the cloud. And the pilot turned to me and said, "Do you want to go in there?" And I didn't want him to lose faith in me, but I was surely on the edge of losing faith in him. And I didn't really know what to say, so I froze. And he just kept on flying at this white cloud. And we get pretty close, and he looks at me again and says, "I don't want to go in there." And loops around, and we take a longer way back. So yeah, I've been in places that scare me. I'm usually better at communicating that. And I find that, like they say, like yes is yes and no is no. And maybe is probably no, unless something inside you says it's yes. That rule works in relationships also. But another place that scared me is I went down. Oh, okay, you have two choices for stories. One is the Amazon jungle in Ecuador, and the other one is a right-wing military camp in Nevada. Which do you want to hear about?
The Amazon.
Amazon? All right. So I'm going with. So I was flying down to visit a Zapara community. Hoping I'm pronouncing it right. The Zapara are people who have previously been supported by the Pachamama Alliance, which is an interesting group if you're interested in native rights in the Amazon. They're supported because they are the last. They have the last vestige of ownership over the development rights for the jungle in Ecuador, of an area of jungle in Ecuador. But the mineral rights, meaning the rights to the oil under the ground, has been purchased by the Chinese. So this dwindling tribe of people is the only thing preventing the jungle from being cut down for oil development. So I was going to visit them, to photograph them, and then give photographs to some organizations that were going to use those photographs to raise funding to help them and help their cause. And I told myself that there's three things I wasn't going to do. I was not going to swim in the rivers. I was not going to drink wild water. And I was not going to participate in any hallucinogenic spiritual rituals. And is it okay to talk about this? So we get there. We get to Quito. I fly. We take a car from the airport to a tiny airport. We take off in a tiny airplane and land on a dirt runway in the middle of the jungle. It's a 6-hour walk from cell service, or so they said, or from like any kind of signal. And the plane forgot our food and our water. So we find that out first. And then we have to get in a boat to get to the place where we're camping, but the boat's only big enough for the gear and the rower of the boat, and then there I am swimming next to a boat in the river with my camera staying dry. And then we get to the campsite, and the community said, we're going to welcome you with a ritual. And so then that was my first experience, and Ecuador was like slightly beyond my comfort zone. And because it was a newly cleared campsite for the visitors, in a newly cleared spot in a jungle, bugs go, because it's newly open, right? It's their territory. And things that eat bugs go there quickly too, like poisonous snakes, like rattlesnakes, and tarantulas. So we had this wonderful campsite with local Amazonian water next to a beautiful river, with a predominance of rattlesnakes and tarantulas and some scorpions. But for a cause that I believed in. And the next morning, I went to the village alone to photograph, because I like being alone with a community. And one of the families I stayed with said, well, can we paint your face, as welcoming you? And I said, sure. And then they paint this boa constrictor that like loops around my face. And a friend who works for an organization there, or works with that community, showed up a few hours later and just cracked up. And I said, why? Does it look strange? And he said, no, it's just pretty permanent ink. And that snake lasted for like 3.5 weeks on my face. I basically got chiefed. But, yeah. Y'all don't know that phrase. It's good. Don't look up that phrase.
What does it mean?
Oh, it was like in the 90s when they publicized if someone got too tipsy at a
I see.
party, they'd draw on your face.
I see. Oh, okay.
is there one like overall message that you're trying to tell through your stories, or does the message change where you go, from different location or to different communities you go? Like, is there one unifying message that you're trying to tell the world through your photographs?
I mean, I think there are core things that I care about. Growing up on the farm, surrounded by development, it has been important to me to communicate the importance of an understanding of where our food comes from and the role that wild land plays in our lives. The woods behind my house felt nurturing growing up and supported species that wouldn't otherwise be able to live in the suburbs of Long Island. And the food that we grew literally fed us and supported us. And I knew where it came from in ways that weren't clear going into a local Stop and Shop or other kind of supermarket. So that communicating the importance of a relationship between people and landscape has been a goal of all of my projects. In the first book, I talked about self-sufficiency and the ways in which people in their individual behaviors can limit their reliance on systems that are damaging to the world, or try to. And I went to the extreme to then bring a message back to the middle ground of how the most of us live. Second book, I was interested in jobs that allow people to live in an area of the American West that is famous for being wild. And one of those jobs is farming, which, if done well, can be sustainable. And the other job is mining, which by essence is non-sustainable, because the only thing that makes the thing you're pulling out of the ground valuable is its limited resource, and it's mixed with its usage. Right? But gold isn't precious if there's a ton of it. Gold is precious if you get 1/10 of an ounce out of 2 tons of rock. So looking at the effect of that on the landscape and the effect of that on the people who live in a landscape, farming and ranching can continue for generations, and mining is boom and bust. Right? So it's jobs up front, and then pretty soon a town is empty, and the company leaves, and the people leave to find other jobs, and the land is left scarred.
And the water's polluted.
And there's other outcomes, potentially, of water being polluted, of
Air pollution.
water, air, other things we need. Which is interesting to me to see some of the political rhetoric today about bringing jobs back. Because I say, well, to what scale of time? Do we look at our grandkids' jobs in a place? Or do we look at our jobs? Now, if we're looking at our grandkids' jobs, then I want people in power to say, we're going to transform the energy grid. We're going to build renewable energy facilities to produce solar panels and wind and figure out a way to sustain ourselves into the future. Those are jobs in energy, but they're jobs that can last. If you're mining coal, you're mining for yourself and maybe your kids. But you ain't mining for further than that.
So we just have a few more minutes left. A couple of questions and that's it.
Well, I had
And then you,
2 questions, but
Yeah.
I just want to know, when you were in high school and college, and even when you were getting your master's, did you have the same interest and concentration, or were you experimenting on other stuff? And I also want to know, in terms of finding the story you just told us about Ecuador, how that's something so interesting. How do you find those things, or are people seeking you out?
So when I was in college, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. But I tried to first say, what are my values? What do I care about? I knew I cared about the lifestyle I grew up with. I cared about people and nature, farming. And then secondly, I said, well, what can I spend time doing and not get bored? Right? And I could go to write an environmental science paper, and I could do it. But by the end of that, I was pretty tired, And I could be in the darkroom for 10 hours and still feel energized. So I started photographing more and trying to connect the photography I was doing to the values that I cared about, causes I cared about.
So, so it sounds like values and passion,
Yeah.
the two together. We have to wrap it up. It's been fantastic, and I love your questions. They're really great, and we'll ask more. And thank you so much, Lucas, for being here today and talking with my students and talking with me.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. So this is Heidi Hutner with Coffee with H2, and we've had the great privilege to be speaking with Lucas Foglia, fantastic nature photographer who uses photography to tell the stories of people in nature. So thank you.